The mayor's State of the City address was long on optimism and short on specifics. There's no workable proposal for a new Chargers stadium, but there's another task force in the face of a bold pitch to build a stadium in L.A. And the Sheriff's Department targets trolley stations to try and stop crime before it happens. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are KPBS Metro reporter Taryn Mento. Hi, Taryn.
Hi, Mark. And
sportscaster Jay Paris of 1090 Sports Radio. Good to see you back, Jay.
Bonjour, Mark.
And reporter Andrew Keats with the Voice of San Diego. Hi, Andy.
How's it going, Mark?
Good to see you today. Well, the build-up to this week's State of the City address promised some new proposals and perhaps some new ideas from Mayor Kevin Faulconer, including how to tackle the issues of a stadium for the Chargers and a bigger convention center downtown. But the speech may not have been what some were waiting for. Taryn, let's start by setting the scene. Where was it? What was the atmosphere like? And what were people thinking they might hear at that speech?
Yeah, well, it was downtown at Balboa Theater. And actually, the way that it opened up started with a video. And it had these adorable children talking about their aspirations, what they wanted to be when they grow up, kind of setting the stage for opportunities in San Diego. And that was what the mayor said, the theme of his speech, about opportunities. And one of the opportunities, I guess you could say, people expected to hear about was more on the convention center expansion and also the talk of a new Charger stadium.
And it didn't really happen. So here's what the mayor had to say about how he's going to address that thorny issue of the Charger stadium.
I am assembling a group of civic leaders to recommend a location and develop a viable financing plan. They will explore all possibilities to finance this project, and they will be charged with studying two different options: building a stadium at the current Mission Valley location, or building a stadium along with an expanded convention center in downtown San Diego.
All right, so another task force.
That's
so
right.
We've been here before, Jay. We had one in 2002. What happened?
I think the first time we heard that, George Bush was in the second year of his first term, and the euro was introduced. So to let you know how long we've been batting this around.
Perspective for
us. So the Chargers were really hoping to get some specifics, the when, how, who, and where out of that speech the other night. Instead, there was pretty ambiguous and a pretty broad brush the mayor painted, and the Chargers weren't too pleased afterward.
So task forces on the stadium. Andy, we've had task forces here forever on the airport. People, I think, glaze over they hear task force. They don't hear a plan.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good way to buy yourself some time if you don't know what you want to do. And that's basically what we have here. And I think if you think about it, if you start gaming it out, he says that he wants to hear the task force results next fall. Well, then that means that whatever proposal they were to come up with, assuming they actually did come up with one, wouldn't be able to go to voters until 2016. So now you've bought yourself 2 full years, basically, by going to a task force.
But I think the key here is the timeline doesn't really fit, because the Chargers have that window to say if they're going to come back or not. So would the Chargers, neglect exercising that clause to keep their options open by hoping something would be done in 2016? That might be a stretch.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. And we're going to get further into Chargers and stadiums here and elsewhere in a little bit here. But let's shift gears to a different aspect, Taryn, of the speech the other night by Mayor Faulconer, and that is that expanded convention center. We have basically 2 big plans, don't we? Expand the one on the waterfront that's there, or do this non-continuous center expansion / stadium.
Right. Tourism officials kind of are adamant that we need a contiguous expansion. It needs to be one long
center,
place,
yeah.
Right? And the other idea that's kind of floating out there is if we do get a new Charger stadium, let's make part of that an off-site expansion of the convention center. They can use it for sort of maybe overflow or to host 2 conventions at the same time. Tourism officials have consistently said that's not what they want. That's not going to meet their needs. And I think the mayor at the State of the City didn't kind of elaborate further on really where we're going to go with that. Just that Steve Cushman, who's the chairman of the board of the Convention Center Corporation, that he's going to continue working on it. And that's really the most details that we got.
So not satisfying, as we said, for a lot of people. Do we need an expanded convention center, Andy?
Well, I mean, the convention center expansions are one of these things. It's like there's an arms race going on all over the country. Every city is constantly saying, "Well, we need to expand our convention center." In
Come to Anaheim. We got a much bigger one than you do down here.
Right, and then the expansion that just happened in Las Vegas or San Antonio or name your city is then used as the reason that every other city needs to get theirs now, and so it creates a nice little system of pumping the pumping the well for everybody.
All right, so we're talking about a bunch of money for a convention center expansion, a bunch of public money and private money and NFL money for perhaps a Charger stadium, but also in that speech, we need a bunch of money for crumbling streets and sewers and public infrastructure works. What did the mayor say about that, Taryn?
Right. Well, on the topic of infrastructure, he proposed a 5-year plan. What's in it, we're not sure, but part of it includes is paving 1,000 miles of streets over that 5 years. Very ambitious. But when it came to how we're going to pay for that, there weren't a lot of those details. He focused a lot on needing to bring reforms to the way that the city gets projects done. He said something along the lines of there's millions of dollars that's just like sitting there waiting to be spent, but it's something to do with the approvals, getting the bids, everything approved, that it's just dragging on. And so he's talking about more about reforming that to like fast track those projects.
So we're going to streamline the process itself because there's money there and projects that could be done now.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no question in any system that if you can, it's found money if you can actually streamline the process to get more work out of it. Sure, but the question is it so much found money that it closes a gap of what's estimated to be a $2 billion deficit? And right now, all the bonding that the city's done consistently for the last few years hasn't even been enough to keep things from getting worse. We're not even at for all the back padding that goes on every time we pave a road, it's not even enough to counteract the simple amount of degradation that's expected based on normal wear and tear.
So we're not even treading water at this point.
We're not even treading water. We're in the process of drowning slowly.
Okay. Yeah, and that $2 billion, I mean, everyone keeps referring to it as an estimate. I mean, Mark Kersey, he's the chair of the infrastructure committee, was speaking about how next week is when finally a report will be done that really looks at all of the infrastructure needs and the deferred maintenance from top to bottom, and that's when we'll actually finally know, what do we need to repair?
All right. Now, the mayor also created some news about ways to get more San Diegans trained for these well-paying, high-tech jobs that we have. He talked about this skills gap that we have, and I think we do have a bite. Let's see what he had to say about that.
I'm assembling a group of San Diego employers, educators, innovators, and workforce experts to connect San Diegans to the opportunities that exist in our own backyard.
All right, so what is he talking about there? How is he going to do this?
Well, it sounds like another task force, a second group to study a problem. However, he did set a deadline. He wants them to come forward with ideas within 6 months, talking about ways to improve access to affordable education and kind of get younger people interested in these science and technology jobs that San Diego has a wealth of, is what he's saying. And he also pointed out that it's not, there's the minimum wage ordinance that's been thrown around that'll now be on the ballot. And he's talking about, it's not about just giving them a couple extra bucks. It's about getting them in jobs that, command kind of a higher pay grade.
Okay, so a push to close that skills gap. He also did speak in Spanish at one point during the speech. What was that all about?
Right, he was, the Tijuana mayor was there, and he was speaking about how a couple months earlier last year they signed an agreement to kind of work together more to utilize the relationship and grow their economic relationship. And he mentioned that they're going to have regular meetings, and he was speaking about how he wants to work with the mayor to support residents on both sides. I think I offered a brief translation that said something, we're going to grow opportunities to make, improve the lives of our residents. And he also mentioned something about he's going to try and help support immigration reform as well.
All right, so as we've said, very broad strokes. Maybe that's what these state of addresses are all about. The president will be giving one here shortly. So we'll see what happens when all the details and the specifics come out. We're going to shift gears now. Kevin Faulconer may not have had a concrete stadium proposal for San Diego, but one has surfaced in Los Angeles. Stan Kroenke, he's the billionaire owner of the St. Louis Rams, wants to transform the old Hollywood Park racetrack in Inglewood into a stadium entertainment complex. And Jay, tell us about this guy. He's got some deep pockets, does he not?
Yes,
among all those rich owners, he's one of the richest.
Yeah, only Paul Allen, the Microsoft co-founder, has deeper pockets, and Stan certainly has a real estate empire, and he married into the Walmart family as well. So he's made his wealth there. I don't think he shops at Walmart, but I think it's built his wealth pretty good. And I think the key difference here with Stan, I mean, there's been a zillion proposals up there. He has a ton of money, and he has a football team, and nobody else has been able to offer.
Well, that's true. That kind of got everybody's attention,
right.
Because let's talk about it. The football teams, and they had two up there. They had the Raiders and they
right.
had the Rams, which of course moved to Los Angeles, the team he owns, and they haven't had one for 20 years. This huge TV market, this huge sports market, they still seem to be there. They're on the map. Los Angeles hasn't gone away, but there's been tons of proposals in the meantime.
Right, and I think people want to say, oh, well, the NFL wasn't able to get back in L.A. The NFL has used L.A. as a leverage pin to build stadiums all over this nation. And I think finally, so many stadiums are finally built now, they don't have to keep playing the L.A. card. And Stan's a perfect example. When he made that proposal about L.A., less than a week later, St. Louis was ready to give him $600 million or so in bonds to build a new stadium in St. Louis. So it is effective playing the L.A. card.
Tell us about that leverage. How do they actually use this?
Well, it's just like what's happening in San Diego. Every city, if it could avoid it, would rather not spend $500 million to build a football stadium.
But they don't want to leave.
But they
lose
also
their team,
don't want to lose the team,
right.
And then so you need some sort of leverage point to say, well, if you don't, then we'll go here. And having a void in Los Angeles has been incredibly lucrative, and you've got new stadiums all over the country. And it's interesting that now that it's starting to seem like maybe we'll actually see a team go to LA. Now you start hearing the rumors, well, we might be able to get two teams in LA.
That's right.
So they don't want to lose their leverage point.
Well, let's bring this back around to San Diego. Let's say, if I speculate a little bit here, that he does build this stadium. He does move the Rams back to Los Angeles here.
Right.
Wouldn't that kind of foreclose the Chargers' option of telling the city here, give us some public money and build a new stadium, or we're going to go to LA? Where do you go now?
Well, they could be a tenant there, and immediately if the Rams or if the Chargers moved up there, the worth of that franchise would just go through the roof. I mean, they built $2 billion for the Clippers. Can you imagine what an NFL team would be worth up there? So
they'd share that stadium.
I think they could share it, co-tenant, and like the Giants and Jets and something like that. Would Mr. Spanos like his own place? Absolutely, but I think. At some point he's been kicking this ball down the road, and it's clear that for 12 years San Diego and the Chargers kind of had their own timetable they were working on and see if they could get something done. That's all changed now with a really strong effort in LA to bring a team in.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that project as he's proposed it up there. This was the old racetrack. I'm sure many folks from San Diego have been up there over the years and gone to Hollywood Park, and it's
right next to the Forum. And I know a lot more people have been to the Forum, and recently I went up there for a Stevie Wonder concert. The Forum's awesome. I mean, the Madison Square Garden bought it, put $100 million into it. I mean,
so they refurbished it, and it's still
a
going concern.
Yeah, they took the scoreboard down. I mean, it's a theater now.
But how was Stevie?
It was awesome. Songs of the Keys of Life, superstition. But next door is 300 acres and 300 prime acres. It sits in between 4 freeways.
Yeah,
I mean,
the location's
you can
huge,
make it work, and the community sport for it is off the charts. So they're dealing with a little different animal up there. Inglewood would love to have an NFL team, I guarantee you.
All right, so we talked briefly about the Chargers' options here. Can you just talk about refurbishing the Forum? Can you refurbish Qualcomm Stadium? Can you make this up to snuff? I know they've done some improvements over the years, or is that off the
you don't hear that, and you're hearing that to keep the bones, if you will, of the facility and to build something new around it, you could almost buy a new one, but
not cost effective.
Yeah, I think more, and we've got to realize this with more and more stadium deals at arenas. These are real estate deals. They're not sports deals anymore, and it's the real estate around it and the development around it that pencils it out for the guys.
Right. So I did want to ask a bottom line question for the whole panel here, and we get to this, and that's what the mayor's new task force is all about. Ultimately, if there's going to be 100, 200, whatever the big sum is of public money here, is there 2/3 vote? Is there solid support in San Diego to vote for a football stadium and keep the Chargers here?
No. I think specifically in Mission Valley to be a tough sell, because I think the way they sell this thing downtown isn't a Charger stadium for Mr. Spanos. It is a convention center. It is
the whole city uses.
You can bring some other events in. If you're just trying to sell a standalone stadium, that could be tough road to sled.
Well, one thing that is coming downtown, they announced this week that's shifting to baseball, is the All-Star Game.
Right.
So not this summer, but next summer, 2016, the Padres will host it down at Petco Park. What does that mean for the city?
It's a big old spotlight on San Diego and the Padres indirectly, and it's going to show off the city. And everybody loves to come to San Diego. The only request I think they have is to have the home run derby early in the day, so the marine layer hadn't come in yet. It'd be warning track derby, you know. That just doesn't sell as well. So
what if they have a home run derby and nobody hits a home run?
That's right. But great job by Mike D, Ron Fowler, those guys over at the Padres. You know, these are tough gems to get from MLB, and they got one.
Yeah, and it seems to me, we talked a little early before we went on the air about the benefit of an all-star game that comes in. You don't have, like for the Olympics, for example, where city's got to lay out, Beijing's example, $3 billion here. The infrastructure's there, the stadium's there, and folks come and everybody has a great time.
Yeah, it's... you know,
the mayor says it's a win-win. It
pretty is. The only thing to make it more of a win-win is if it was in wintertime and they could fill up those hotel rooms when there's so many vacancies, which is why we have 2 bowl games. You know, so yeah, I think it's a win for the Padres, and it really just emphasizes the culture change that's gone on down there.
Naming Bud Selig Plaza may have paid off after all.
I can't spell quid pro quid, so.
All right, so one thing I want to touch on before we leave this sports segment is those of us who care, those of us who play hockey and love hockey. Professional hockey may be coming back to San Diego. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, to ice in San Diego usually means margaritas, you know. So, but this would actually be a pro team on ice, and it'd be the Anaheim Ducks AAA team.
Top farm team.
Yeah,
it was always the lower minor leagues
exactly.
before. Sometimes you see some guys that make it to the NHL, but most of the time it was guys who were
minor
league professionals.
Right. These guys will be, you know, 100 miles and one level away from the NHL, and that's pretty enticing.
Stars coming in and out of here. So is San Diego, can you make a go of it in San Diego with professional hockey?
You know, I think so. The arena, you go back to the venue questions, which bedeviled the Chargers, but the goals were pretty darn popular when they were going.
And they were successful. They won 2 or 3 of those Taylor Cups, I think.
They were Taylor Cups, very good.
And they had a core following. I don't know if any of you folks, besides me, love hockey, but the people who follow them really love them.
Right, it's a core group, and if you can build on that, I think they have something there.
There we go. All right, well, we'll see, and we'll certainly look forward to next year if hockey comes back, those of us who love it.
You going to go up for the team?
No, certainly not. Never me. In Steven Spielberg's 2000 movie Minority Report, Tom Cruise was a cop of the dystopian future who arrested people before they committed a crime. The present-day San Diego Sheriff's Operation Lemon Drop is certainly not that, but it does have echoes of the film's pre-crime squad. Andy, tell us about Operation Lemon Drop. It's got such an exotic name, and what's an 11-7?
It's like law enforcement does these exotic names. It's like they're just begging journalists to look into things. But basically, the way this worked was they said so. In 2011, Realignment passed, which was, among other things, an attempt to deal with prison overcrowding. And it created a class of ex-con, basically, felons, who, when they were released, normally they would have gone on probation or parole, which would have given the government some way to monitor what they're doing through drug testing, jobs monitoring, that sort of thing. These people were released free and clear.
And it was called on an 1170. That's the
like
operating
the section of the law, right? So they were referred to as 1170s.
Right.
And so they had no requirements to report to anyone in any state or local office. And basically, the sheriff's department thought that was not such a good idea. So they went about reverse engineering their own way to monitor these people. So they took all their names and they would run them through a series of databases, everything that they have at their disposal, DMV records, prior arrest records, anything that the government has access to, and started looking for patterns that would suggest that these people were not just one-time criminals, but prolific criminals. Mm-hmm. And so they said, okay, where are they? They circled a map where they all were, and then they started looking a little bit further. They actually monitored their social media feeds and found out that a lot of these guys were spending a lot of time on the trolley. So they said, all right, well, a lot of them live in Lemon Grove, and a lot of them use the trolley. Let's set up basically a large public dragnet at the trolley station.
So they need an excuse to pull these folks aside and some way to question them without can't just single people out and I'm a police officer, I sit down, I want to question you.
In hopes that they will be committing some crime, something that is arrestable.
Right.
And
it gives them an opening.
It gives them an opening, and by their own admission, the concern is not with whatever crime they happen to be committing at that moment. It is with what they think they're going to do in the future that they say is being prevented by doing this.
Okay, so the crime here is being a scuffle on the trolley, right?
Right, so they say, how do we establish probable cause? Well, we'll go to the trolley and we'll do a fare check. And if you don't have fare, well, now you've broken the law, so now we can search you, we can ask you questions, we can monitor you. And one thing that is particularly interesting to me is all those interviews are going back into the same database that they're using to establish who the criminals are. So it creates this self-perpetuating cycle where you're only doing these interviews in the communities where you set up the operations. But the interviews are the things that point you back to where your next operation should be. So you end up always being in the same communities you're already policing.
So it's inevitable you're going to be talking to a lot of the same people here. It does smack a little bit here. Now, you get on a train, you expect the conductor's going to say, hey, you got a ticket. Everybody expects that. You're going to have a ticket. A lot of people jump on and jump off and don't pay the fare.
And they have routine fare enforcement. You know, people who come by and say, can I
see your valid ticket?
Let me see your valid ticket. That happens all the time. That happens every day.
People expect that. But this smacks a little bit of those old World War II movies where, you know, the Nazi officers on the platform and let me see your papers here or we're taking you off to some terrible place.
I mean, there's 50 officers.
I was just going to say, there's not just one or two walking around. There's multiple.
50 officers wearing Kevlar, armed, and you know if you're found to not have a ticket, it doesn't, you know, they don't just write you a citation and say, oh, you're not on probation. Okay, they pull you to the side with, you know, another dozen officers waiting there and start interrogating you.
Well, I found an interesting quote in your story, Commander Dave Myers with the Sheriff's Department. He was explaining, or he was characterizing these ex-inmates as the worst of the worst. But what, in the setup here, you were telling us not really. They were released on realignment because they weren't the worst of the worst.
It is interesting that he views this as essentially a no-brainer opportunity. They have these people that they know to be likely criminals because of their analysis, and that's just who they're going to target.
And they have the database they can take advantage of.
Right, but the state of California has made a very strong determination that these are the least of the worst.
That's why we're letting them out.
That's why we're letting them out without probation or parole.
Yeah. So go ahead.
I was just say, what kind of crimes have they committed and that they can be released?
So this is non-sexual, non-violent, non-serious is the triple non, as they're called in the academic world. So these are, a lot of times it's drugs. You know, take away those three things, you usually.
And many of them may have been in for parole violations and missing appointments with parole officers in the past. Of course, we did have the ballot measure, which was passed overwhelmingly last fall, that a lot of these folks won't be going into state prison to begin with in the future.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of realignment on the front end.
And so ultimately, you know, this was an operation. They did 5 installments over a 4-month period.
Yeah, it's not every day. We should point that out. They go in and they target this on a specific date.
And I mean, they're really just hoping to catch people breaking crimes.
So is it successful? What are the numbers showing?
So they 16,000 people went through this situation, had this really large dramatic show of force become something that they had to deal with, and out of those 16,000 people, they found about like 600 people who gave them some reason to ask further questions. Sometimes that was a fair violation, but it might have been something else.
Put them in the secondary.
Put them in the next level of questioning. And of those, there was 400 some fair violations citations were given, and 180 people were arrested for something or another, and that includes misdemeanors. So you've got 180 arrests affected by what's supposed to be an extremely targeted operation that went through 16,000 people.
Right.
Did they have would they have a target goal of how many what their percentage rate of getting actually arresting people?
No, and it's interesting this idea of like how do you measure whether this worked or not, right? Which is basically what that comes down to. Is another way I asked it was, okay, so this started with a list of these 1170s. How many of the 180 arrests were 1170s? And they said we can't keep track of that. We don't have that information, and as far as I said, well, so how do you measure success? How do you determine whether this works?
What are they saying about how effective?
Is that, well, crime rates are down, are they not? Look at the crime rates. I said, well, and that's true. Crime rates are down.
But they've been trending down for a long time
throughout
California,
the state, throughout San Diego, throughout the nation, right? So, and this is an extremely novel and unique program. What San Diego is doing here is not just policing as usual. I talked to multiple experts who said that they'd not heard anything like this, and in the context of California and reacting to realignment, this is unique. So
what does the ACLU, other civil libertarians, have to say about this whole approach?
Well, so they are certainly concerned with equal protection under the law, the possibilities of profiling, not just that this community seems to have been specifically profiled and its demographics are different than La Jolla's, for instance. But they've also alleged that they have talked to people and they have done interviews with people who say that they were treated differently based on how young they were, whether they were black or white, that sort of thing.
So it gets into the racial profiling aspect.
Yeah, I mean, it is sort of related to the conversation that's been happening in New York around stop and frisk, which you know, the claim has always been, well, if you're not doing anything illegal, you have nothing to worry about, which I find compelling only insofar as people are willing to turn it around and ask themselves if that is in fact how they would feel if it was happening in their neighborhood. I mean, if suddenly the sheriff's department believed that there was some sort of high-end drug operation in La Jolla, you know, cocaine dealer or something like that, and they were going to set up seatbelt checks, and anytime you didn't have a seatbelt, not only were you going to get a seatbelt ticket, but you were going to pull aside, you were going to search your car, you were going to question about everything, where you're going, what you're doing, who's your wife, all that stuff. I think people would have a different reaction to the program if that's what was happening.
Any legal aspects or reactions to this so far in the few seconds that we have left? Anybody filed anything yet, or are they monitoring that?
ACLU is pursuing their operations. They've been doing Know Your Rights campaigns. So far, there's no formal legal proceedings.
And you really don't have to. You have to prove you have a valid ticket, but you don't have to talk to a police officer if they want to question you about these sorts of things.
Right, and that's true, but it's something that a lot of people don't know.
They don't know, and they wind up doing anyway. Yeah. All right, well, we'll be watching your follow-up on that. It's a fascinating story. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Taryn Mento of KPBS News, Jay Paris of 1090 Sports Radio, and Andrew Keats of Voice of San Diego. A reminder, all of the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.